talking about.
Testing, testing.
We're still muted before we start here.
Oh,
You can say hi now.
I haven't seen the pages.
There's the Audrey Fine, she's just a attendant, right?
Yeah, just public. Steve, can you hear us all right? I heard you say yeah, but I didn't, or I saw you say yeah, but I didn't hear you. He shows muted. Can't hear you. Okay, we'll do our best. Scott Peter should be here too. Scott. Sorry, I got held up. This is good, no worries.
We have others online.
We have Niels is here. Sarah, and then Steve Harmon's online. Can't hear him, but he can hear us.
Hey.
That's good.
What are you doing?
Applicants here. Else quick, let me go. Tell them we're ready.
Well, good to see you again. Yeah, it's good to see you. Can you guys hand me that so I can sign it?
Hey, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Well, thank you. Do we have, yeah, Steve is on the Zoom, okay.
That's Steve Harmon, yeah.
Steve Herman, yep.
All right, we're good.
Yeah, I think we're ready on our end of it.
All right, then. We will call the Cottonwood Heights City Architecture Review Commission meeting for January 26, 2023 to order. Welcome all that are here and participating. First of all, we need to acknowledge if any one on the commission has any ex parte communications or conflict of interest that they need to disclose regarding any of the agenda items. Seeing none, we will move on to business item number 2, 2.1, project SUB-22-005, which is review and potential action on a request by Ivory Homes for a certificate of design compliance for a planned unit development and public park at 3625 East Overhill Drive. With that, I'll turn the time over to staff for their report.
Thank you. Just quickly before we start, it's been a few months since the ARC has met. We've had a few staff changes. You've probably worked with Andy Hulka in the past. He has taken a position with Salt Lake City.
We announced it last time.
Did you? Okay.
I
So
told
Sam's
them-
a senior planner.
They stuck with me.
Ian is our new associate planner and a sustainability analyst.
Hello.
So
That's why
My phone number doesn't work with Ian.
yeah,
I mean, Ian.
with Andy,
Andy.
yeah,
That's like,
yeah, it's
Well,
not Andy
If you
anymore.
have
Yeah.
any inland port questions, give Andy a call.
Yeah.
Oh, I did.
He says he doesn't get any phone calls, so
Harass him.
yeah.
Everyone start calling. him.
Everyone
Yeah,
start
that's
calling him, but
first
yeah,
order
we're
of business.
really excited to have Ian. Ian and I went to school together. We were in the planning program up at the U.
Yeah.
So it's fun to reunite, and I think you'll be seeing him throughout meetings as different projects come on, so.
Ian, what's your last name?
Harris.
Harris, great. Well, it's good to have you here. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll jump into this now. There is going to be a bit of background here. Scott is aware of this. This is kind of around the corner from where he lives, so he's been tracking this. But for the other commissioners, I think the background of how this project has come to you tonight will be helpful for the discussion. So this is a proposal at 3625 East Dover Hill Drive for a planned unit development and preliminary subdivision plat, as well as a public park within this development. The applicant is Ivory Homes. Ivory Homes is represented tonight. So if you have questions of the design or anything like that, they are available. The owner of the property is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The size of the parcel is 6.17 acres. So for context, the parcel is located here. It's off of Wasatch Boulevard, kind of just across from where the new city park is on the east side of Wasatch Boulevard, Ferguson Park. So just on the other side. It is currently still looks like a church meeting house property with a large parking lot, church building, and then a recreation field. So that is the subject property tonight. From a zoning standpoint, the zoning's R18, single family residential. There's no proposed changes to that, but that's what most of the surrounding neighborhood is. There is some 2-family residential, multifamily just to the south of the parcel. So what's being proposed is a 13-lot subdivision with a city park located in the middle of it, labeled as parcel A on the screen here. The 13 lots are broken up on the west and east side of the property. The park's kind of a unique shape, and there's a good reason why that I'll get into here. When it comes to approval authority, the Planning Commission has the approval authority for the actual subdivision plat, the lot sizes, the densities, things like that. And they have unanimously approved this subdivision plat layout. So the number of lots, the location, some setback modifications on a few of the lots have been approved already by the Planning Commission. Where this is a planned unit development, the city ordinance requires that the Architecture Review Commission also review these for specific reasons, which is in your staff report and which is a slide here regarding the ARC's purview. Mostly related to design compatibility, architecture standards, and in this case, this is a little unique. The public park itself is something we really want the ARC's input on. So here's some background, and this is kind of important to understand why there's a city park in the middle of a private development proposal. In 2020, the city became aware that the church was considering this property for surplus. It had been damaged by a fire prior to that. So they made the decision rather to repair that and put it back into use, to surplus it and sell it off. At the time the city became aware of this, we met on numerous occasions with church representatives to express our interest as a city in retaining, purchasing, preserving at least a portion of the property for open space, for true public open space. Even though it's a recreational field, or it was technically still privately owned, so we couldn't advertise this as a city park or a public park in any way. So the city was interested in doing that. Where we're a fairly built out city, getting new public open space, that opportunity doesn't come up a whole lot. So this was a good one. The next year, the property was listed for sale by Ivory Homes. They had told the city at the time, if you're interested in the property, submit an offer. We're just going to put this out so you can submit an offer like everyone else can. So in spring of that year, the city submitted an offer to purchase 3 acres of open space. There, in this kind of time period, there's heavy involvement by the local neighborhood and the local church congregation to demonstrate the investment that had been made by that congregation, by the neighbors, for the original construction of the 3-acre recreation space on the lot. And that really helped demonstrate, in my opinion, at least the value to the neighborhood of retaining some public space on this parcel, the value to the neighborhood, both members of that church congregation and not. Through this, and I'm oversimplifying, there were a lot of meetings, a lot of negotiation, a lot of discussions. The church made the final decision to offer 2 acres for sale to the city. So that the city had submitted a purchase offer, and we were told that we would be offered 2 acres for a set price. And it was the eastern 2 acres on the site. The remaining acreage was put under contract by Ivory Homes. So roughly 4 acres to Ivory Homes and 2 to the city. Those are round numbers. The city then began working with Ivory Homes. This is in probably 2021 to maximize the park design. The eastern 2 acres was something for the city. So that was nice. It wasn't the 3 we had originally wanted, which and then the eastern 2 acres themselves, when you look at it, it created a few concerns in terms of access, where it was just this eastern portion. There wasn't a lot of frontage. There was interest in providing access to the public from Dover Hill Drive, which is a larger neighborhood network. There was interest in preserving the existing pavilion structure that's on the site, and then providing as much park frontage as possible, because a little narrow 70-foot frontage park is not quite ideal. So at the time, after those meetings that involved the church and Ivory Homes, and I will state that as soon as these properties went under contract, there's been a good faith effort by all parties to try to find a solution that is as mutually beneficial as possible. So I do want to give that credit where it's due. Ivory presented a planned unit development in 2021 that it consisted of 17 lots and a public park. I do have a graphic of that I'll show in a minute. This was approved by the Planning Commission, actually, with some modifications to the setback reductions that Ivory had requested. They had requested reduced setbacks to be able to fit the lots in there better to optimize the park design. So the plat was approved for 17 lots, but without some of the setback reductions that Ivory wanted. Turned out that didn't end up mattering very much anyways, because part of the city's review process included a fault study. This is in a fault study zone, this parcel. And when they completed that fault study, they did trenches all across the site in 2022. They found a lot of fault lines running through that site. That created a lot of unbuildable area in locations that had originally been approved with habitable structures. So that kind of sent everyone back to the drawing board to try to find another solution, another configuration that still was as mutually as beneficial as possible to all the parties, particularly the city in achieving a functional park that prioritized all the things that we had expressed being important. So Ivory submitted a revised plan unit development concept earlier this year, or I guess late 2022. And that went to the Planning Commission just earlier this month, which is what you see here, and received unanimous approval by the Planning Commission. So that brings you up to speed. There's a lot of background here. The city, even though we're not the applicant, we're involved because we are submitting and purchasing a portion of this acreage for the purpose of a public park. Again, more context. This was the original 17 lot plan unit development. It is easier to see on the TV screen behind me. The color shows up better.
The contrast is a lot better on this one than the projector.
So while this was what was originally approved, you can see some of the things the city was interested in even then was access. They had a little sidewalk access from Dover Hill, more frontage on the park, and then preservation of that pavilion structure. This is the results of the fault study that was done. So you can see the purple there is right where a lot of those yellow lots are. But the red lines are fault lines, and the purple around it is fault setback area where you can't build. So you can see a large portion that conveniently lines up now with where the public park is located is encumbered by fault lines. So that brings us back to where we are today. Just generally, there are ongoing negotiations in terms of getting this park constructed in a timely manner and avoiding the the cost to the city to purchase this land, because we originally offered the eastern 2 acres, that eastern 2 acres was relatively flat, open space type area. This 2 acres or roughly 2 acres that's located in the middle of the site is the current location of parking lot and church structure, and there's a lot of demolition and site preparation costs. So there are ongoing negotiations on the real estate transaction side that we feel are making good progress. And won't really factor into what the ARC is looking at tonight, but I did want to make you aware of that. And then we get into an actual concept that's been done for the park design itself, which I imagine is what we'll spend a good portion of the time tonight talking about. So the park design it's a small park. This has always been envisioned. I mean, even a 2 acre park, no matter what the configuration is a pretty small neighborhood scale park, more of a passive park. So it's not envisioned as something you can, use for sports leagues or anything like that. It's just a, neighborhood scale park. Limited parking, a lot of neighborhood walking access. What they've shown here is the amenities are a circulator kind of pedestrian trail around the site. The existing pavilion located in the southeast corner, interfacing with a playground area. And based on discussion last night, I do have a schematic of the actual model of playground structure that I'll show. Kind of surrounded by low water landscaping around the edges there, providing a buffer to the residential area to the north there that's existing today. Parking, a few stalls located on Dover Hill Drive, but nowhere else, and there has been some feedback on that. And then some of the areas there that will be used as park space, but will double as stormwater kind of retention overflow area. This is a schematic just because it's hard to tell what kind of playground that is there. The model number corresponds with what's shown here. So, it's a relatively decent playground structure there. It's not something like you would even see at Mount View Park necessarily, but it's a different scale of park.
I think it would be helpful to talk a little bit about the feedback we got from Parks, Trails, Open Space Committee last night. You kind of mentioned
Yeah, we can do that, and that'll lead in. Scott was there last night, so this is all the same information that he's heard already. But we took this to the Park Trails and Open Space Committee. They're an advisory committee, so they don't have any formal decision-making authority, but they just made some comments and some recommendations. Those included exploring either breaking up or trying to add at least a few parking stalls near the pavilion. Just as that might be an area people focus on. A couple stalls down there would be helpful. On the circulator trail, there was a comment made to, instead of cutting it across through here, to kind of wind it around and keep it on the outside as much as possible, which opens up the turf, the play area there in the middle. To use pollinator landscaping species in this landscaping area, which I didn't think sounded like much of an issue. And then there was some desire raised to see if grading can be done in such a way. And I assume you'll get into this discussion, and Peter from Ivory can join in on this when we get there. It's to grade the site in such a way that could preserve at least some of the function of the sledding hill that has historically been used on the property. And again, I would invite you to have Ivory come up and talk about any of the logistics of achieving that if that's a desire, but that comment was raised as well. So I'll quickly go through the rest of this. A lot of this is planning commission level detail, but it gives you the full picture, and then turn it over to you for discussion. A few of the lots did receive a setback modification, which is allowed in planned unit developments. You can see there the lots kind of focused away from any existing development. So lot 109, which is on the top right there, has a reduced setback adjacent to Wasatch Boulevard. 110, 111, and 112 have reduced interior side yard setbacks. So the distance between homes is slightly reduced from what you could normally build. Every lot in here is over 8,000 square feet, substantially over actually. And every other lot that's not highlighted in blue is not requesting any sort of modification of setbacks or anything like that. That's just a list of what's being requested, which we don't need to worry too much about. Here's our grading profile that might be helpful. So you can see profile that section AA is looking kind of west to east across the site from Dover Hill Drive over to Wasatch. So you can see the grade changes there. There are some neighbors to the north that are concerned about the grading of that hillside there. Ivory has proposed a retaining wall solution to retain the grade that exists there today. There's a concrete bleacher structure that's built into the hillside there that obviously would be demolished and replaced by retaining wall structures. We don't have a final spec on what that retaining wall is. I would say that we do have city retaining wall standards that have to be met. Engineering would be provided as part of the final plat review process. But that is the proposal there. And I do want to note, because I told the public I would, that there are concerns with how that hillside is graded and making sure it's done safely. The staff answer would be that we have standards in place to look at grading of hillsides and slopes and fill and compaction and things like that, that will all be caught in the full technical review process.
So, so you're talking about, yeah, right now is maybe a 45 or even bigger slope, right? Are you gonna cut it back in order to get enough building area with a vertical retaining wall?
So you can see that in some places they are proposing it would cut a little more than the natural slope is today. Not drastically, but it'd be a two-tiered retaining wall system where that slope is.
But they're using that as part of a rear yard then, right?
Yeah, and slope or retaining wall, it would still be considered part of that acreage.
In
Yeah,
the lot.
correct.
The lot has the retaining wall in it.
Yes, in the public park I don't believe any retaining would be necessary there. You can see the slope on the contour starts a little farther to the east.
If you go to the plot plan that's over the aerial, you can see pretty
Yeah.
clearly.
Yeah, and I can go back to that. I'll just note section BB is looking south to north. This would be a good cross section looking into the major frontage of that public park. You can see there's quite a bit of grade from west to east across the site. From Dover Hill to the left over to Wasatch, the site gradually but consistently slopes down. So the park itself wouldn't be a flat park. There'd be flatter areas, but there would be terrain on the park to where the pavilion and playground sit, quite a bit lower than the flat activity area on the top. So grading is something that will be kept in mind, especially for the pedestrian trail that goes through the site to avoid making that too steep.
Was it's probably not likely, but to get some kind of playground or play area, maybe a diamond or some other. was
That's
that
not
considered?
proposed, yeah.
You mean a ball field?
Well, yeah, or some sort. I mean, there isn't really much
There's not
room
enough
there,
room.
is there?
Yeah, it's
No.
not big enough for a ball.
You
Yeah.
can't really get much going. Yeah.
So this may help, but part of where this has to go is because there's a purchase being made by the city here. The way we're trying to see this through right now is that per development agreement between the city council and Ivory Homes, as the subdivision builds out, Ivory Homes would also construct the park. We have rough numbers for the construction cost of the park that we have to keep kind of at a stable area because that price reduction needs to be seen through the real estate transaction to make this all happen. So with the original vision that this would be a smaller passive neighborhood scale park and keeping that in mind that, we can't put every amenity we've ever envisioned there because it just doesn't work logistically. We gave that feedback and this was the concept plan that came forward, but even initially, this wasn't planned as a park that would have a ball field or anything like that. Kind of on the same thematic idea as Golden Hills Park down by the fire station on Wasatch, although that's even bigger than this one. So my last slide here, and then it's your meeting from here on out. The ARC's authority for reviewing plan unit developments is listed here, these bullet points. I won't go through them all, but the things we're looking at, especially with this one, where I think it would be most helpful is getting the ARC's feedback on pedestrian circulation through the site, particularly through that public park. The park design itself, your feedback and your expertise will be helpful as the city council considers and reviews its development agreement at the end of this process. And then just general review to make sure that, you know, the subdivision as a whole is compatible with the surrounding area. I do have a design catalog of the types of homes that Ivory is intending to use on this site. So if you have questions about that, I can open that as well. They've indicated it's going to be a, you know, more of a high-end product, kind of like what is down the road in the Watson Hollow subdivisions off of Creek and kind of off of Danish Road. But these are the provisions that that the Planning Commission and ARC are tasked with looking at when a plan unit development is submitted. So I'll turn it back to you and let you take it from there. And again, Ivory's here if you have questions for him.
Maybe we
Great.
can go back to the park design and just have that up as we chat.
So I would invite Ivory if they would like to make any comments or add anything to the staff's report.
Peter, you're good to just come up, I think, and sit if you want. The table mic is turned on, so it'll
Okay,
capture you. To have Peter introduce himself, follow for
Yes,
the
please.
record. Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, Peter Gamdrulis, project manager with Ivory Development. Frog in my throat, excuse me. Thank you for inviting me. No, at this point, I really don't have much more to add than what Mike has. I appreciate you having me here and I'm happy to answer what questions I can.
Great, thank you. So I've been following this pretty closely and for quite some time. And first of all, I really appreciate all of the work from staff, from Ivory, from everybody to get to a proposal here that it works for the community and all the hard work. I've identified several things that I wanted to bring up, and so if I'm just going to jump into it, and then we can go from there. So the first thing that I think is really important to consider, particularly for lots 105 through 109, that back up to the homes on Brighton Point Drive. If you could go to the cross section. I know that the concept has been that the pad that the homes are on would be slightly elevated from the lots further to the south. My recommendation would be to have those lots as low as possible to minimize blocking of views from the homes that are those existing homes that are along Brighton Point. When people bought those homes on Brighton Point, they assumed that they would always have a park back behind them, and so it's changing what they have behind them. And I know they're concerned about views from their lot towards the mountains. And so as low as we can make those homes, I think the best.
What is the great difference from the ball field to the homes, you know?
I don't think you have a final grading plan, do you?
No, well, but you're gonna pretty much use the ball field as starting point, right?
Yes,
So you start from that up to the homes, and is it 10 or 20 or 30 foot?
you know, without referencing it, I can't tell you. Obviously with the there would be the excavation of the
But I'm trying to
existing
get
hillside.
to what Scott is at. I mean, I think it's at least 20 feet,
Yeah, it's something like that.
at least 20 to 25 feet. How high how high can they build
35 feet is the maximum building
to
height.
the ridge height?
To
The
the
highest
highest
point.
point, the peak.
Highest
In
point?
some sensitive lands properties, it's 30 feet as the maximum height. And so that can kick in under certain I think slope conditions, when you have a certain slope on the site.
Yeah,
For subdivisions, it's 35 feet from subdivision grade.
Yeah.
So the final grading plan that would be approved. It's 35 feet from existing grade for the builder to then come in and build, but existing grade is considered kind of the final subdivision grade. What's the existing grade at the time that the subdivision is ready to build? So that as a builder coming in, you can't add more fill.
I assume these are two-story buildings,
There would be a mix of both.
3 stories too?
No 3-story,
Oh, 2 stories.
2-story and Rambler, excuse me.
So you're in the 25 to 30 foot high.
Yeah.
Roughly, yeah, right.
So what I'm thinking is that pad for those lots, for those buildings, those homes. You know, I hesitate to set a height, but I think it should be in like the 5 feet range above existing grade where the ball field is. So we're not filling in 10 feet and then building the home on top of that.
I will say from kind of a staff perspective, what we see with our engineering department when they review the grading plan is any deviation or change to grading has to be kind of necessitated by other standards.
Yeah.
So it can't be just like an arbitrary desire to, to
Yeah.
add in a ton of fill. So I would say any recommendation made on grading, I think it's good to put it with the caveat of like, as is possible with meeting drainage.
Right.
Stormwater, kind of all of those little like caveats to make sure it would be feasible, as I am not a grading expert.
Well, obviously, they have to have drainage that's gonna flow from those lots out to eventually those retention basins and onto Avondale Drive. And so, you're gonna have a minimum slope of 1.5 to 2%. But what I want to be careful of is that we don't, they're also going to be trying to balance the cut and fill on the site. And I don't want to fill that pad for those homes more than we need for grading and drainage, because that's gonna impact the adjacent residents.
Sure. It sounds like what I'm hearing from you is a desire to keep any fill added on to the north side of that site to the minimum possible to achieve functionality.
Yep.
Throughout the site.
That's it.
I'm just here taking notes. I
Yeah.
just want to make sure I'm capturing what the ARC adds accurately.
Yep.
Um,
I appreciate that. So the second point, dealing with that same area, is the retaining walls there. Obviously, you pointed out that there's engineering and I'm confident that whatever retaining walls are designed there will meet the city's requirements and will be safe from that perspective. Given that they're the rear lot, they're not going to be publicly visible except for those who own homes there. I'm not super concerned about it because it'll be something that the homeowner acquires when they purchase the lot in the home. But I do think we need aesthetic attention needs to be paid to that retaining wall, and I like what they're showing as far as the stepped retaining wall, because a 20-foot retaining wall in the back of your house is pretty rough. And being able to have some planting or some things to step and soften that retaining wall, I think is really important from an aesthetic perspective. The next thing that I think is really critical if you go to the landscape plan is access to the park. So from a neighborhood perspective, I think there's 2 types of access that I'm concerned about. One is access from the existing neighborhood to the park, and the other is access from the proposed development to the park. Regarding the latter, if you look at that private drive that forms a T, Street B is the top of the T, If you go to the lotting plan, you can see it, but I think it's really important that there is access from Street B to the park. So that people, for example, who live in lot 109, 108, 107 can easily access the park without having to walk all the way down and around the other lots. I also am concerned that I know the long-term plan for the Parks and Recreation Plan for the city includes a crossing from
Ferguson.
yeah, over to Ferguson. And I really think there needs to be an access from Street B to Wasatch Boulevard to make that future connection. And I know when it went through the planning commission, they talked about that access and felt like that could be handled within the community and didn't need to have an easement specified on the plat, but that's an important both aesthetic and community access connection all the way across there.
What is that connection between them? Is it a on grade or is it above grade connection?
It hasn't been designed
It's
yet.
a long-term visioning to maybe connect the amenity at Ferguson Park to whatever would be here. I think it was speculated as above grade, kind of a,
Well, the grade changes from west to east, so it has to be separated. I mean, just
Well,
topographically.
well, I'm kind of getting to, are we talking bridge?
I think they
It
were
might be,
looking at a bridge.
From staff standpoint,
We're not talking bridge. We killed that.
well,
That-
so that's in UDOT's EIS. That's in
Yeah.
UDOT's Little Cottonwood Canyon study.
That's
So
also a tricky part with access onto Wasatch is it is a UDOT road. And they are reticent, I think, to add access points along Wasatch.
Yep.
And so that's something to keep in mind in the mix.
But through a bridge?
I think it's,
the EIS is grade separated.
yeah,
The emphasis is on pedestrian safety.
Well, underground, because,
Yeah.
we fought and killed that, on
Canyon Center.
Yeah, by
Canyon Center, I mean, it's just bridges on the streets are something we are not happy with in Salt Lake City or
Sure.
in the county. And particularly not up there with Canyon. That would have been terrible.
definitely don't have.
But
any-
that's another discussion. for
Yeah.
another
Yeah,
day.
we definitely don't have any spec on a crossing, but I think it is good to keep in mind those long range visions of having some sort of connectivity between the two sites and maybe how do we look at supporting that? So I think that's a good topic.
So then the other thought is,
So can I clarify, you were saying some sort of connection this way, but also into the park
Yes.
this way?
So just
Yep.
extending the T.
and I'm not saying it has to be a full street, but I'm saying some kind of a pedestrian connection.
When the folks in those homes access the park,
Yeah, yeah.
they're either gonna walk over the landscaping and room it,
Sure.
or if we provide a sidewalk.
But
Yeah,
if
that
it's,
makes
I mean,
sense.
if it's
Passive leak
fenced
resistance.
all along
Well, that too.
105 and 113, they won't have access there.
I see what you mean.
So having a little sidewalk or an access there, I think would be really good.
What
So
are,
something we did, oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say, I definitely see the train of thought on providing that visible, usable pedestrian access to the park. In talking about extending the T eastward to get out to Wasatch, is that something that you think like an easement could help support to where at a future point when
Yeah.
maybe a connection gets put in, there's that,
Yeah, I wouldn't
Reserve
put
space.
it in now, but I'd have a condition that
Yeah.
there's an option for that.
okay, just
Yeah.
wanting to make
So,
sure
yeah,
you weren't
that's
expecting
exactly
a
where I was going.
sidewalk also going out just to Wasatch Boulevard, nowhere.
Yeah,
On, Peter, so you're aware, on ICO's project on the northwest corner of the city, there, a similar condition was put on that along Little Cottonwood Creek where they recorded an easement along the creek. And it's just an easement, and then if and when a public trail system is developed adjacent to it, then the city can go in and provide that public connection there.
yeah.
Was that, excuse me, was that easement recorded as part of the plat, or
think
was
it
that for a
was.
separate instrument?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly. It's on the plan and then it's in that's a whole different entitlement mechanism, obviously, but that was the idea there. I don't know that we care as long as, if that's the desire that, some sort of provision for potential future access
Well,
is.
yeah,
I don't think-
I'm sorry, man.
Please.
I mean, maybe, whatever they end up doing with Wasatch, if there is gonna be sidewalks on both sides, which I suspect there must be
Sure.
because of the buses and traffic and all that. I mean, it would not have a traffic access, but have a pedestrian
Sure.
access to Wasatch.
Sure.
That's, yeah.
Right, and, then you're encouraging more park activity. I mean, I can see we're connecting it, but hopefully it's not a bridge.
I think if it's grade separated and easement,
Yeah,
it really won't work here. UDOT will have to find another place because of the
Yeah.
ADA and landing and grading.
well,
But if it is something like a sidewalk or a trail on the west side, then a little connection there makes sense.
yeah,
Yeah,
So to make sure I'm just taking accurate notes, in talking about extending that street B's hammerhead. Going westward, you would be looking for something, a spec on a plan that would actually show like a sidewalk or a path installed at the present time. And then looking at extending it eastward, you would be more comfortable or would be comfortable with it being an invisible easement that just is kind of held in place.
yes,
Okay.
but that T is not public street, right?
it's not a public
Private.
street, so,
So it would be that it's a private right of way for your people, it's really not for anybody else, so to speak. Unless that connection,
that whole connection
that other
becomes a
connection
public
can become
access.
a public access, right?
And I think ultimately it really should be a public access for that connection, and that, I don't know how you feel about that, but that's my feeling.
Yeah, so in terms of the access to the park, I don't think that's an issue. With the sidewalk. We would obviously want to plan the park better. Right now, you'd walk into a.
Right.
little
Yeah.
landscape.
Walk through the bushes.
Yeah, it's
So,
that sidewalk connection.
not a problem. The easement, I think we'd be happy to explore, given. That it would be just an easement at this time and if we could, the only reason I ask is that just simply a matter of on the plat or through a separate instrument. I would hope that it would be through a separate instrument. Maybe the development agreement is the
That's fine.
instrument to do it, but I just want to make sure that it's clear what could happen, that this is not, I want to limit the size. I don't want to do the whole size of the private right of way. So maybe something that would accommodate a walking path.
Mhm.
But I also want to make sure that in the time being, which I could assume might be perpetual, that that eventual lot owner is able to landscape and do as they want until that time.
I think that would be the preferred thing. Yeah,
Okay, so I'm taking down from you, Peter. Happy to look into the possibility of the sidewalk extending into the park. And then looking into an instrument to do the easement, but maybe in such a way that accommodates a smaller width.
sure. And that the homeowner can landscape
landscape.
it and
Right,
until such time that an actual connection is built.
okay. Great.
So I do have concerns about the reduced setback for between lots 110 and 111 and 111 and 112. So here's some thoughts. I think if there's anywhere that we would do a reduced setback, that's probably a pretty good place to do it. Personally, I just think 10 feet between single family residential development is too tight, but I know that the city has reached out to the owner of the property that is to the south, and that owner has not expressed any willingness to participate in what's going on here. I don't know what options there are, but I would strongly encourage the city to even look at options for eminent domain to acquire that lot. It is not a buildable lot. The city's main water line with a big concrete box goes right through that lot. And for years, it has been an eyesore. It's overgrown with weeds. It's not maintained. It just sits there, and that would be an alternative location for a connection to Wasatch Boulevard. But if that parcel could be acquired, then the lots 110, 111, and 112 could be made wider and therefore increase the setback between those buildings and balance a connection and the setback in that area. It also creates a potential opportunity for a parking lot. Again, I know the city has been trying to acquire that and has not had luck to date, but that's my thoughts. I'd love to be able to take advantage of that land and turn it into something that is maintained and really integral to the community, as opposed to just a vacant lot that's uncared for, that'll never be developed on.
Yeah, certainly good points. Procedurally, a few challenges within the scope of this application.
Yeah.
It's a little adjacent to that.
I know that.
Eminent domain has to be used for a public purpose, so the city could not, and I'm for the public record, I'm not saying this has ever even been discussed. I'm just reacting to what I heard. Eminent domain could not be used and then given as part of private development to widen out the lots there. That would have to be done through a willing negotiated purchase of land. Certainly, there have been attempts as this whole transaction has gone down, I believe by Ivory and by the city to reach out to that owner without success. Regarding the 5-foot setbacks, I will just say the planning commission did debate this and go around in circles on it. Their conclusion was similar to yours where, hey, on the 17 lot configuration, they asked for that setback reduction kind of subdivision wide. On this one, the city requested that Ivory limit any reductions so they don't impact the existing adjacent residential areas, and they did do that. So staff is supportive of this. We have seen setback reductions in other developments throughout the city. There is history of that happening, and they've turned out great. So and then the planning commission did vote to approve that. So we don't have a lot of concern with it from staff or planning commission standpoint. Certainly buying that parcel and opening that whole corner up would have helped a ton for design and for future access and just parking and space in general. So this seems to be optimal. The other option here that Ivory kind of stated in the planning commission meeting was a standard subdivision with just a typical public roundabout or cul-de-sac, sorry, not a roundabout. That resulted in a smaller park, fewer lots, but a smaller park, no preservation of the pavilion. The decision was made that this is probably more ideal for the future public park. And that, the city was comfortable with a limited reduction in setbacks, limited to these eastern lots.
And again, as I mentioned at the beginning, I think if there's anywhere you're going to have setback variances, this is the place to do it. But all of that said, I think when you start to develop homes, anything you can do to with the design of the layout of the homes to minimize the adjacency of the actual building to those would help the architecture. And so I would encourage that wherever it can, particularly between 12 and 11 and 10 and 11.
Yeah.
I'm not so worried about the 112 adjacent to that parcel, and I'm not so worried about 109 adjacent to Wasatch Boulevard, because I think there's no impact there. But where you have people living right next to each other, it's something to think about.
Through an architectural standpoint, just out of like curiosity, what are techniques to do that, to limit, like, could it be things
So-
like cantilevering a bay window where it's not actually square footage, or what are you, just more specificity of what you're suggesting?
I don't think cantilevering would make a difference.
Okay.
My thought is if, let's say you're maximizing on 111, the northern side, then make the south side of 111 and the north side of 112 as big as you can make those two, so you start to get some separation between those buildings. You know, if you're going to maximize the whole building envelope, well, that's what you've done. But if you
Sure.
have some options to articulate the building
Okay.
and shift them on the site one way or another, do it in a way that maximizes the space between.
That is helpful, just so I make sure I'm taking down specific points all for that.
Mhm.
Maybe along those lines too is, being a private is the parking. It's kind of the Oaks, kind of a syndrome that we have here too. You're gonna, when I come visiting, I'm gonna be parking in their driveway. That's the only place I can park, right?
Yep.
And if three of us are visiting, we don't have a room to go. So I don't know what the plans are, you know, I don't know what the city does or what the rules are for that.
Yeah,
It's just that the Oaks has been a pain.
Sure.
You know, and you're gonna recreate it here again.
The
Yeah.
city's standard is having 2 off-street parking stalls per single family residence, so driveway with 2.
2 off street.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then
Well,
with
you use
it,
the driveway, but that's it though.
yeah, city
That's
code
the
doesn't
city
take into
standard.
account visitor. It's just two per residential
Is
dwelling.
that what it is?
yeah,
Off-street?
that's the
That
standard.
driveway is the parking for that.
Can be your
Driveway,
garage or
garage.
whatever.
So I think in a lot of cases, you actually have like 4 technically, it's 2 in the garage, 2 in the driveway. That would meet the city's standard for it.
Right,
And then I don't know with private road, how they plan to regulate that. Obviously with public streets, the city is able to control that
yeah,
parking is allowed with a private street. It's
yeah.
not a public right of way, but
What is your experience with Ivory Homes and this kind of a setup?
Sure, I mean, obviously, when you have more narrow streets and no street parking, guest parking is limited to the driveways.
Yeah,
In the event that, I mean, my assumption is, in the event of a party, they're gonna, if we're gonna put stalls down in the park, we'll fill those up. I mean, it's just one of those things that you will
Yeah.
see, but,
And
yeah,
you may see some on-street parking
Yeah.
on the public roads.
yeah.
There are
I mean, that's-
ordinances that allow that.
I mean, yeah, they could, I mean, that is allowed to do.
yeah, anyone can park on a public street. It is an interesting kind of feels quasi-private because the street in front of our homes, I think we all think of as like, that's my parking spot, that's mine. But when it is a public street, you know, anyone can park there within the city's ordinance, and you have to move the vehicle. You can't leave it there parked for days at a time.
Yeah,
So it's tricky. It is a change. But the 2 off-street parking stalls does meet the city standard for parking.
Along those lines, you know, we have asked them for, this is part of the final steps and kind of details of snow removal plan for the public street and trash maintenance and
I
things
mean,
like that.
private street.
Private street, yeah, sorry. Just for that street A and street B. Obviously, these homes will be served by the public street system, not an
Yeah.
issue there, but those ones we'll just have to have that document.
yes, well, coming back to the, are you done?
Oh, no, I'm just getting started. But if you have an idea, go for it.
Yeah, can you go back to the plan, yeah?
The landscaping
The
one.
landscape plan. I'm always kind of concerned with little parks like that. Who is really gonna use it, you know, and how can you animate it and how can you make it a usable park? We can always put little footprints like that, but some of it doesn't get used much. Let's look at Ferguson and see how much that gets used, you know. I think the dock rental
Yeah,
there.
different users there,
You
yeah.
need uses. So one little thing I would do though is I have the trail connected so I can go jogging, don't have to go out on the street.
Have it close a loop.
Do 10 loops any morning in a loop,
Can't wait.
but you don't have to go out in the street.
So I should clarify, there is sidewalk here.
Yeah, but don't do the
So
sidewalk.
you'd come here. So you're saying
Stay inside, yeah.
loop it in here somewhere.
Well, in somewhere in there, I don't know, it's just. The mental thing about it, I'm running in there with my dog or whatever, you know, and so think in terms, that's a small thing. And how do you get access to it? You got parking up there off of Dover Hill. But I don't see any
There is-
pedestrian access.
There's a little sidewalk.
There's a little sidewalk, yeah,
Yeah, it's kind of hard to tell. It almost outlines the parking stalls,
yeah.
but it's where we're so far out on the screen,
Yeah,
it's quite hard to
But
see.
yeah, you want to have access there. So that's just one, one thing that trying to activate it. And then, yeah, having a playground, probably more of a playground. It's that, I mean, your neighborhood is like ours, will be old timers, but you're starting getting young people. We're getting, so you gotta get kids with, people with children again.
Yep.
Like we had 30, 40 years ago. And that part would be great for people to come and visit. But it probably needs to be more than one little playground, maybe. There's gotta be more activity in there. Looking at why, the people that go there would be either old timers running on the track. Or it would be mothers with kids or dads, and they gotta have something to do and get as much. Equipment and whatever that they actually is there for some reason, otherwise it becomes just a nice green spot.
Maybe we could look at the playground. We should pull up what it
Yeah.
entailed again to kind of see what's there.
But there's so many other things that, it could be used and this is a rather central one, but. I don't know. Scott probably is more into this too, but just creating, trampolines you probably didn't want, but.
But
But
the city wants.
Yeah,
that,
like-
yeah.
at least.
Some of the feedback we heard is, Scott, this is probably on your list, so jump in here, but with the church parking lot being open. Walkers would cut through that church parking lot. It was a good neighborhood circulator. So some of the feedback we heard last night at the Parks Committee meeting was. Just for pedestrians being able to still access. Through Dover Hill Drive down into this neighborhood and back up was really key, and there were a lot of users that use it for that purpose.
Yeah, so as I mentioned last night, when the church and the parking lot was there, the church, the parking lot, the park really became the center of the community and unified the community. And as soon as the fencing went up around this lot, it really bifurcated Summerhill and Avondale from Bright Point, Dover Hill, and the rest of the neighborhood. So that connection is really important. And I think it's more than just a physical connection. I think it needs to be a visual connection. My concern right now with how the park, well, let me step back. I really am appreciative that the design has evolved to have a bigger opening now than what it was before, which was just a little 10-foot pathway. So I'm really pleased with that. I'm concerned that the way the parking is laid out there, that it creates a visual block to the park. And one of the things we're trying to do is get visual open space and visual connection. The other thing is, I think you need a very direct sidewalk access from Dover Hill to that main loop and not, circulate around the parking lot and then connect. So there's some subtleties in how that's designed. I'd rather have a few fewer stalls there to open it up and put some stalls. I think where we really need parking is down by the pavilion, because everybody in the neighborhood can basically walk and enter into the park from the Dover Hill side. It's those who are going to use the pavilion that are going to be carrying things.
Yeah, so bringing something out of a vehicle.
That's where the parking really needs to be, rather than up there by Dover Hill. The other thing is that along Dover Hill, the street gets quite a bit wider in that location, so on-street parking there works better than further down on Dover Hill. When you go further down, you get one car parked on the street and it really makes it difficult. But in this area, it's very wide and you could have cars parked on both sides of the street and still have good access there. So I think we need to minimize or eliminate the parking there and get some parking down by the pavilion.
Yeah, that was gonna be my question. Do you want any parking up on Dover Hill, or do you see that as more of a neighborhood pedestrian scale access? And if the occasional car wants to park there, they can park on the road?
Yeah.
I personally would say, don't do any parking up there.
Yeah,
My philosophy on as a landscape architect, park designer for neighborhood parks is minimize parking and make them walkable, because then they're used by the neighborhood more so than people driving from somewhere else. Okay,
yeah, it needs to be a window open up. Otherwise, you're gonna have a 30 foot or 40 feet of concrete driveway over the sidewalk into the parking, right? These are all very kind of obtrusive, from people. So I would just open it up and make it come on in.
yeah,
If I can mention, from our perspective, we actually think there should be no actual dedicated parking spots here. The only reason we added those is there's a lot of community feedback that they wanted it. The reason it was installed there is it made the most sense with grading.
right.
Moving it down to those red areas is a lot. Yeah, I mean, that's the point where, for those who are familiar with the site, where you drop from.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, the pavilion almost like sits like quite
Yeah.
low. in
Yeah,
ground.
there's a hill
Yeah.
pavilion and then it drops off. again.
So, yeah, I mean, that's the challenge with adding parking there. I would, if it was me, for the park of this scale, I don't think it makes sense to have parking stalls. We wouldn't have added
I mean,
those.
it happens to be that you can park all the way on the north side of the street. You can get 20 cars.
And there's no vehicle,
Yeah.
there's no homes
There's
there,
no homes
so
there, yeah.
I agree with that.
But that's why I usually park always, not in the parking lot, because
I
up
think
above.
most would park.
But I mean, there's one big tradition, in that neighborhood is breakfast, and things like that. I mean, try to keep that alive. I know we don't have the kitchen anymore, but somehow bring stuff over, right?
Yeah.
Try to keep some of those things alive. And even if there's not a playground, maybe there still is a small ball diamond for dad to go out and pitch to their kids type of thing. So it's like just a putting green. It's just a little pitching.
Yeah, I would not put any kind of a baseball facility. I think if you have an open lawn, open turf area, then they can go and throw
Yeah.
the ball, they can kick a soccer
Football,
ball, they
yeah.
can play frisbee, but not.
There's quite a bit of slope, but anyway.
Just to revisit the parking comment, as I take notes on that, what I have, I know we've talked about a few different scenarios, what I have is looking at either reducing or eliminating altogether the stalls on Dover Hill. Looking at the feasibility of moving them down to the Summer Hill bend. If that's not feasible, also looking into the idea of just not doing parking stalls and seeing. I think we would want to see through our traffic, engineer perspective, what they would expect for parking stalls. We have certain standards for that. So we'd want to look at that and make sure we weren't violating our own standards. But is it catching kind of what you guys are getting at with just generally removing them from
Is
Dover
the
Hill?
preference to have none?
That's my.
Is that what I
preference.
just heard in the last? Okay,
Doesn't
That's
seem
my
necessary.
preference.
so the preference is to have no
Okay,
parking.
that's what I've
anywhere
written
unless
down,
there's an
but if there's
engineer.
a requirement.
Just on-street parking on Dover Hill and on 70, what is it, 75, 76, 50.
50.
yeah.
And then if there is some sort of requirement to have those stalls, minimizing however possible, those being on Dover Hill.
Mhm.
So then we use eminent domain, acquire the parcel for public use as a park.
I think if you want to be the public spokesperson for eminent domain.
That's not me saying.
I am not a huge fan, except when I think it really makes a difference, and this is one of the few places I would encourage it.
Okay,
I will let you know that we'll continue to make efforts on that. So what you're looking at with the T in private row would be our second phase.
Yeah.
Because that one actually, the other stuff's pretty easy in terms of stubbing.
Yeah,
We would continue to court that purchase and would then come back if the city was supportive of the plat amendment. And make use of that. That's something we've eyed the whole time, but it's, as the city has had, we ran into a brick wall.
I really appreciate that and strongly encourage it.
Okay, I've got the parking stuff down. That's really interesting. That wasn't what I was expecting, but if, it makes sense if you're looking to keep it at the neighborhood scale, kind of sending that clear message.
Yeah. Well, and if they do make the connection to Ferguson Park across the street, I don't want a lot of people parking here and then, so anyway, I agree with that. So,
Got that.
I think the city has talked about this, but I want to point it out, the retention basins, minimize the slopes that make it feel like a deep retention basin. I think a 4-to-1 is probably the city's requirement, but if you could, if you can make it even shallower slope, I think it's much better and contour the shape of the basin so it has more of a naturalistic feel than just, a square meteor crater, and to that point where you have the pavilion, right now, the pavilion is kind of turning its back on that retention basin because the slopes of the retention basin come right up to the edge of the pavilion. I think if you pulled the slope a little bit away and created some architectural features, that whole retention basin, if it were in turf, could form a really nice amenity to the pavilion, but you've got to have a buffer between the edge of the pavilion and
just drop off.
And architecturally, from a landscape perspective, you could do some really cool things to actually make it feel like a great space, and a lot of great activity could happen down in that space.
Yeah, actually, you need to be able to walk around the pavilion.
Yeah.
Because tables are usually sitting up right out to the edge.
Mhm.
So you should have a 5-8 foot walk around. And
Yeah.
I can see the basin becoming where you set up tables.
Yeah, and
Because it's never gonna be full of water.
So Niels, are you looking for the actual walking path to circulate around the pavilion?
yeah.
So adding kind of a secondary
Yeah.
loop that would bump around it?
Base around it.
That's how the pavilion is being used. You set up the
Sure.
tables.
Sure.
And then you need to be able to get around, right? But then also maybe do a little sloped path down into the basin. Because I can
Yeah.
see it setting up, with 100 people, a wedding or even anything like that, that you can set up tables down there. So think about that right now it is really isolated. It's on 4 sides, almost squashed in.
So you're saying try to architecturally integrate this
Yeah.
southeastern retention area
Yeah,
into the
Yeah.
functionality of the pavilion.
Yeah.
And get some room around it. And then also on the playground stuff, it is trying to, from sandboxes to just anything out there that would attract, and get people to use it and come and hang out.
I mean, it
The
really could
skateboard
be.
probably is not a good idea, right?
You
Yeah,
probably
we
need more
want that better.
space
Yeah.
for.
Yeah.
skate-
I mean, it might attract kind of what you don't want to have, but think about that, how you can animate the park with
Some
more about
swings
that
would
stuff.
be nice. We
Yeah.
don't have a lot of swings.
We were hearing last night, I learned for the first time last night how much space is needed around swings. I don't know if that's something that's, feasible with.
It would
the
be
grading.
probably an either or.
Even if it's for the toddler ones. I
A
really
play set
like
or a
those.
swing kind of thing.
I
Well,
mean,
the rec center, this was unrelated to this project. They're installing new playgrounds at a few different parks around the city. And yeah, the installer was saying the standards of installing a swing, for however tall that is, you have to have double the height of it in the fall zone on both sides, you have to 6 feet on the edges. So what it would come down to is if the ARC would prefer something like a more active, like a swing set or something else, that would probably realistically go in place of the playground. It's probably more of
What if you could
an
do,
either
like,
or.
Two of the baby ones.
The little ones. We
Because
can,
honestly, like having young children,
Sure.
you have to like wait in line for the one available toddler swing
Sure.
at the rec center. But I
Yeah.
could see, like pushing my baby on that while my other two are running around
Yeah,
the
let me-
playground.
let me
That
let
could be
know.
really nice, but keep people there, right?
See, that's the thinking about it. It's gotta be something that people are actually using.
We don't have a lot of swings like at any of
No.
the
Do you
parks, like
need-
Bywater doesn't, that's the one we walk
Do you
to.
need-
Anything that moves animates people.
Fall zone for those toddler ones?
I don't
or is
think
it
so.
less-
They're smaller because they don't swing as far.
yeah, they're just.
Hopefully,
Kind of do that.
toddlers and-
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of information. If you guys need it, I can.
I'll take a note that there's an interest in looking at even adding like a limited amount of swings if there's a
I'd
feasibility.
love to
of
see
doing
So
a
it's a-
spinner over a swing personally.
Realistically is a price equation. So that one may have to be prioritized. If you want to see that over some of the other things we're talking about, or is that lower than, say expanding the walking path or some of these other
that. Yeah,
comments
it
you
is
made?
probably an
We
equation.
we
developed.
probably need to prioritize some of these comments.
So I would rather see play equipment over parking,
Mhm.
Okay, well, that certainly does
you
affect the
know,
cost.
because you take out that parking lot and replace it with landscaping and now that's quite a bit of money.
Maybe the offset there can go towards enhancing this.
Mhm.
Especially, I would guess if you're not looking at intensive grading to make the parking stalls possible on 7650.
And so it hasn't been priced to add parking there. That would bring that, the number that Mike is referencing up.
Right.
If we were to move parking down to that level, just so we can make.
Unless we're able to eliminate it.
Yeah,
The elimination would reduce, yeah, obviously, and which could go into that. And then so from me being childless and having to put in a lot of these tot lots, I don't think that I know the full value of them. They're obviously the most asked for, but we would be happy to move with a swing or a different type of active amenity. But again,
I'd say that's what we love most about our community is that we have multiple parks that we can walk to with our children from our house.
Sure.
And I see a lot of young families doing that where they're walking from their homes, right?
Yeah.
And so I think any more of those that we can add is gonna be a huge one.
so if the tot lot is, yeah, if the tot lot's a major value, we'd leave it, they're expensive. So I just, if you believe if the community believes it's a value, that's what we
I
could put in there.
I
But if
don't
it's
remember ever going to the playgrounds and there not being other families there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're used, and
Sure.
I think a lot.
Because there was discussion about. Maybe I shouldn't even bring this up, but like a pickleball court, right? But that would drive a lot of traffic.
Yeah.
Probably outside traffic to the park.
And that's
I mean,
gonna be people probably driving there, whereas a playground is gonna be folks walking.
Thanks. And
in homes, Yeah,
It's not usually a destination for a small.
Yeah.
lot, so,
Pickleball courts are also noisy.
yeah.
And bright.
They're huge,
Lots of lights.
hugely popular, but I would do a tot lot over to pickleball and I would put some attention into that. I think I would also argue that we need to do some things around the tot lot. Like provide some trees that provide shade and maybe some benches that mom can sit or dad can sit on the bench and watch the kids play and change the shape. So it's just not a square form. There's a lot we can do that way.
and we want it to be used in the summer. I mean, the shade is a big thing too. Like
Yeah,
if you look
good
at the
point.
rec center, that being almost fully in shade, it's.
Yeah, it's really nice.
huge.
Those stairs.
It does
Yeah.
sit
Oh,
above does sit above the pavilion.
Yeah,
So you do see that there's the grade up.
And then those are.
So-
even if there's like trees over the benches.
Yeah,
to at least-
Yeah, 9 here, Peter, these are benches, these little.
Yeah,
Never
We
gonna fall
have
out.
benches and one of the,
Yeah, those.
I think they're there, Peter. It's just really faint. Those
Yeah,
black.
those are, we did incorporate benches at least in one of these
Um,
plans.
Yep.
So one of the things that you're always trying to do is keep kids in a tot lot from getting out in the street. And one of the things that we have lost is the sledding hill. Those lots 105 through 109, that is used by all the kids every winter for sledding. They build jumps and jump off it with their skis, etc. And it's a use that is really lost. What I would propose and would really like to see is that the tot lot be pressed down into the grade so that it's more aligned with the pavilion and there's a relationship there instead of having to go up the steps. And then the grading on the west side of the park be tightened up and made steeper so that you have, in particular, on the west and on the south side of the tot lot, this kind of grade that holds people in.
So we're talking
Here,
kind of excavating.
is that what you're talking about, Scott? Is this area being a little steeper so you could
Yeah,
sled down in there?
But I think what you're saying to that, it's important that, yeah, the tot lot and the
Pavilion.
shelter, you know, is together. You would sit in there and you'll be out, it's sort of a,
Or do you mirror it so that the benches and the shrubs are facing the street? So if I'm sitting there at the benches, my kid has to run past me before they go into the street versus the
Well,
other way.
so what I'm saying is if that kind of slope kind of comes around, you've got your grade coming here. And if it slopes down around that, now it's depressed
So it's
and the
fitting into
kids
the
aren't,
depression.
the kids aren't gonna run out into the street because
Yeah.
they gotta go up a hill before.
Also,
they go to
anyone
the
sledding
street.
isn't hitting a kid, although
Right.
if it's snowy, they're not gonna be on the equipment.
Yes,
Yeah.
Kind of saying, I mean, this is drastic.
Yeah.
That
Yep.
kind of thing. So the playground goes down.
yep,
so what I'm gathering is that there is a restriction, obviously, on budget, and Ivory Homes is building this and building it in, so you have a budget, or
Well,
is that what it is?
that's be negotiated
All
into
part
the
of the-
final purchase price.
The
but
real
Oh.
estate.
it's-
Okay,
Yeah,
but
how
you end
it's-
up with a budget that is we will build whether you pay or they pay or however, right?
Well, the idea is there will be price reductions granted in the sale to whatever party, we don't have that figured out, to compensate for the development costs of the park.
so
Park can be
ultimately the
built.
church ends up donating that cost.
The sale price goes down,
Yeah,
to offset the development costs of the park, so that when the private development goes in, the park goes in at the same time, it's all built. Frankly, Ivory Homes can build the same park that the city would build for much cheaper than the city would have to pay to build it.
Yeah,
I think it's great.
no, it's a
Really-
good thing,
So,
no,
so you're right, though, Niels, there is this kind of, this tightrope we have to walk to, because the seller does have to be comfortable with whatever that final price is.
okay,
So there's sort of an obligation on us to show that, hey, these are important comments.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The park is still fairly modest, it's small, we're not asking for every little thing here.
I think understanding the priorities, and knowing that it's not all going to be possible, what are the priorities that we
Yeah,
really want to
right.
focus on?
is there gonna be light in the park?
I don't think there's
It's not-
outdoor lighting.
Is it not?
Yeah, they-
No lights at all?
There's currently lighting in the pavilion, and I think maintaining that lighting to the pavilion is important.
Well, where did they get it from?
Probably
What's the
be,
meter?
killing that, if
Yeah.
not have already. Yeah, I mean, we'd look at that. Trying to think, do you have a street light right there
There's no.
on that
streetlights.
end of, no, on Avondale?
Well, yeah, the pavilion having it, but you gotta have sprinklers, you gotta have power, so you gotta have a meter.
So, I mean, we could put a power meter. I mean, we'll obviously have the landscape meter for
Yeah.
the power meter for the landscaping that we'll have to.
Yeah.
So I guess it would probably
Well,
make
there
sense.
is power
near-
there right now, and I don't know that it runs all the way up to the chapel.
So
That's something you should look into. They might go out to
Yeah,
the street,
we went through a lot of
up
wires
the
there,
pole.
trenching.
Yeah,
yeah,
I think any outdoor lighting that is looked at would probably keeping it to a minimum so it doesn't disrupt the neighborhood. Wouldn't
Probably
want
just the
it.
pavilion, because like in other parks, you see the parking lots lit. If this doesn't
Yeah.
have a parking lot, there's nothing.
Or like a
lit there.
walkway.
We will have, there's a street lighting requirement, so I believe they'll be installing one
Yeah,
along here and
Yeah,
maybe one
It wouldn't be more than
down
one.
along here.
but it's just a pavilion at least has light, because.
Okay, so an
feasible.
interest in seeing, keeping some light to the pavilion if feasible.
Like I say, you will have some power need.
Here's my concern. This area, the parking lot that is there has had a lot of nefarious activity in it. And part of the reason is because it's dark, and part of the reason is that everybody backs up to it, right? And with the church there, nobody was there keeping an eye on it. I am a little concerned that we have a similar situation, but I'm glad we don't have the parking to create that, so.
I would say from a planning perspective, it is data driven that anytime we're adding in those homes facing a park, there's that built-in security and
Yeah.
surveillance. So I think that is a benefit for that natural eyes on the street of having people.
But see, I don't
Looking at the
see any
park.
of these lots that are really facing the
Sure.
park anymore. That's my concern.
Sure. But even having a greater continued presence of homeowners kind of in the area versus an empty site
Totally.
with no one. I
And
think will be
you,
an
you could
improvement.
locate along
That's
here.
Yeah, but that doesn't help in
You
the.
could, for this access at least, you could
Yeah,
orient the
yeah.
street light farther up this
Yeah,
way.
yeah, that would be important.
Identified it, but yeah, we could put one close to the pavilion and close to, I mean,
And they-
since we're required,
Instead
Yeah.
of here, you could put it over here.
unless you have a certain spacing issue.
There will be
We can look.
spacing, but I
Can
think with
we-
that many linear feet, I doubt you'd run into it.
Okay.
So there's a ratio, per every such and such feet, you have to have one, and you don't want them closer than a certain threshold, but. If there's a way to look at
Trying to target.
articulating the required lighting,
Is that something that could be done through the development agreement? Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, so I mean, we'd obviously be happy to target it in those particular areas.
Coming back to the retention, I don't know if it was mentioned that maximize the retention in the community on the lots before it gets to the retention in the park.
And we did have
I think you had
2-3
something.
weeks ago, we had a meeting just to talk engineering
Mhm.
of how that needs to be done. So there has been some feedback. I think it'll end up looking different than what you see here, but I know your team's
yeah.
working on that.
It will certainly look different. We went and did infiltration testing,
Well,
so that we could see if we could reduce, Cottonwood Heights, unlike most cities, does allow infiltration as part of that calculation. So we're not assuming that. So we will reduce our required retention number. Not as much as I wish we had. We also found that we can do some, so. What I can say is right now we are looking at shrinking that. Obviously, our intention would be to use the park for the bubble up. And that
Right.
was explained to us from city engineering that was kind of the target, is that, what the bubble up could go into the park, and so that's what we're going to try and do. What we're looking at right now, and it has not been cleared from our end, and I should have brought this up earlier when you were speaking about that. The slope would be much less drastic from the pavilion. We did notice that was a design weakness, and obviously it's crammed there for a reason, because that's our low point, and that's how much room we had outside of our
but
site.
shrinking that with the infiltration added in would maybe allow a greater buffer around the pavilion too.
We believe so.
So that could be a good opportunity
Exactly.
for that,
So
and maybe have room to extend that walking path around it if that's within the budget.
we definitely are looking to shrink that. It will shrink. I just am not ready to share a
sure.
feasible design of that.
Well, and I think as was mentioned, bringing the path around the outside of the other retention basin up above. And then working the grade, so it's really a smooth transition from that big open lawn area into the retention basin, I think would go a long way too.
I'm sorry, so are you kind of
This,
suggesting?
Pulling this walking path somewhere like that
Yeah.
instead of where it's going.
And then making it just a, a kind of a tiered transition into that retention basin and so you're getting these tiers in the park and working that with how the grading comes around the play area. It could be really fun and aesthetically really enticing.
Interesting, sure.
Yeah, really
Yeah,
interesting.
and I'm sorry, I was so focused on the eastern one that I was not referencing that. But I'd have to go look at what we were infiltration there. We did do an additional pit to
Yeah.
test that.
I love coming back to the play equipment. I love swings. I think we all do. The problem with swings is 2 or 3 kids use them and that's it. Whereas a play structure, you can get 20 kids on it, and so from play value to ratio of kids, there's a lot more value in a play structure than swings.
I will say from a staff perspective, one of the things in that Park Shoals Open Space Master Plan is filling in amenity gaps. So if we have numbers on how many amenities are in what parks, and so I do think it could be a good opportunity if the parks are low on swings, is this an opportunity to kind of add that in? To maybe try to balance out more what each park has.
And I get that it's not as many kids for
Yeah.
as like for the space, but this is for neighborhood.
Right.
Right, and so if I look at like our neighborhood parks, you usually have a couple families there at a time, and
Yeah.
so a couple kids to accommodate is
Sure.
enough, whereas like the rec center playground, that one, we get massive groups, right? And that's a little bit different.
So just that whole thing needs to be looked at really carefully,
Sure.
right? Then landscaping, we talked about using low water-wise landscaping around the outside. I think that's the right approach.
Yeah, and all this, Peter, clarify me if I'm wrong here, all the shaded stuff and kind of around the outside is low water.
That's exactly.
Zero
what
scape,
you're
kinda.
Yeah, so not zero scape because we do have the drip irrigation and stuff in there. but yeah.
Zero,
Yeah.
yeah.
Zero.
Not zero, but
Zero.
zero.
Zero,
Yeah,
but
so-
X, yeah.
Exactly, so I'm gonna embroider it on a hat,
Yeah.
wear it because.
No, yeah, so that was the intention, and we also, and again, this, I should have referenced this earlier. Our intention was to do that in the eastern, the southeastern corner as well because of the slopes. But I heard you mention maybe you would prefer sod there.
Well, I'm thinking sod area near the pavilion on that kind of as it comes out in the retention basin, because rocked retention basins always look nasty, whereas
Yeah.
sod in the retention basin, you get your storm, you get your debris and your mud, and then you
But we
You
have
mow
out
it and
here.
you're
at
done.
City Hall.
Yeah. So I have no preference. My landscape guy who did this, is like, you get the challenges with mowing them and it's going to be the city mowing it. So again, we're gonna look at a different grade on that eventually. So maybe that will be a
I do think an opportunity to have the sod as sort of like an extension of play area. I
I
probably am
suppose
not
so.
gonna send a kid into like the rocks
That's fair.
to
Yeah.
play.
I just don't know that you're sledding that part. That's the problem.
No,
Maybe
not
like
there.
an amphitheater kind of type thing.
Yeah.
Like I can.
We
see
could,
that kind
But
of-
if you're at a pavilion, your kid's gonna run
Into
into
the-
that,
Yeah,
and I
that's
mean,
true.
that's just.
The
happen.
rocks,
fair.
The rock is just.
That's
Yeah.
it. That was the reason we did that, but
And then just
happy to
to
move.
remind everybody, one comment we got last night was, in addition to that low water scape, looking at species that are not only low water, but also pollinator
I
friendly.
was gonna bring
to
that up.
try
I
to,
agree with that
um,
comment too.
Give a little bit of habitat.
Mhm.
And I think there is, I'm not a expert at plant species, but I think there is some natural overlap between like xeric species and pollinator friendly, so that should be a pretty easy. So,
All for it.
So I think the last thing that I have on my list is consider putting pet stations, 1 or 2 pet stations in the park. I know one of the issues that the church had and why they eventually fenced the park off is that people would use it for their dogs and wouldn't clean up the
yeah,
waste. And so by having some pet stations
Yeah.
and even some garbage cans,
I would think you'd want that, here and here.
Probably by
Yep.
just
There,
whatever the
different
trash
places.
receptacles would
We have in numerous parks, most recently the East Jordan Canal by Mount View Park, there's a combo
Yeah,
dog bag garbage
Yeah.
station.
And
like
that's
that.
what will be at Ferguson, so I do think it would be, if long range, we see a connection between those two spaces. Having the same type of amenity visually, it both could be kind of cool, so I think.
I do think having Ferguson as a designated dog park will help a lot, because now people finally have a place to take their dog, but.
But if you're in the neighborhood walking your pet around the loop.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
I've
think
got
that's
that.
really.
Here's a question for you, just because I'm curious. We don't like to put them in private parks in our HOAs just because of the expense of maintaining.
like refilling the bags.
I'm just curious from the city perspective, is that a challenge for the city or, I mean, because obviously we have no, the expense is almost nil to put them in. But it's the maintain.
Well, I would think,
Yeah,
So, I don't know.
we have to maintain Ferguson Park, which is being built as a dog park,
Yeah,
so,
which
so
makes
there's
sense.
gotta be the. The
Infrastructure.
staffing in place. We contract with the rec service area to provide that, so it would just be a contract adjustment for maintenance. But a little park of this scale, if you put a couple in, I think
1 to
that's
2 would-
manageable.
I'm-
That's typical maintenance they have to do anyways, yeah.
Yeah, it's good to think about the
Well,
cost.
I'm just saying in our private parks, we don't like to do it.
And what you don't want is to put it in and then it get
And then it's
completely
empty.
filled and then, yeah.
The bags are empty and the,
Bags are
the
empty, the
can
trash
is
is
full.
full, and no one's there to change it.
Right.
yeah.
the other thing is you don't want it, you don't want it really close to the pavilion, because then you
Yeah,
smell.
the odor. Well, I have a note that we'll look into placing 1 to 2 pet stations around the loop. I think as the design evolves and is refined, it probably be good to continue to coordinate with the rec service.
Yep.
Area on how maintenance might affect the design, but they are on the Parks Committee, they sit on that committee, so they've been involved throughout this.
Those are my comments.
I think that's a very comprehensive list.
So just procedurally, what we will do is probably work with Ivory to try to implement some of these. Get a rough update on a cost estimate to include that all and see where it lands us as compared to where it is today.
Yep.
And try as much as possible to keep it within that same ballpark. And then take that on with your recommendations, with the committee's recommendations, the planning commission, take that all to the city council for the development agreement. And then we have to work on the property acquisition side of it as well.
If I can just ask for a little more clarification on one thing, because
Yeah.
I'm gonna go back to our park designers. And the one thing I'm struggling to understand is the changing of the grade for the play. For
So
the
sinking it,
And then the compensating around it, like I'm just having trouble visualizing where.
How
like,
how
what
about,
kind of-
how about this? How about I offer to work with them
That'd be
and
great.
work with you to
That'd be good.
work on that?
Yeah, because that's what I'm confused about. That's the one that's kind of like hitting my like dollar signs right now that I'm like, ooh. So I'd love to take down your contact.
I think we have a really good list right now, kind of looking into the feasibility. I'm sure as you each hit in your own projects, like it does get reduced with what actually ends up happening and what's feasible budget wise, but I think that is just something we probably need more information on to see what can be done.
And I'll have them do it, I just. Without fully like grasping that, I'm just like,
Sure.
I could see that being an expensive.
Yeah, I think anytime we're looking at a big change to grading, there is that implied expense, so. Maybe there's some opportunities if there is reduced parking
Yeah,
to pick up
maybe
some
that.
extra budget, but. It will be, I think, come down to just figuring out what's actually feasible within the real estate transaction. So are you recommending that we bring it back to another meeting with
No.
consideration?
No, I'm recommending that the ARC make a motion for certificate of design compliance with these comments. And then that will be incorporated into the development
Development
agreement
agreement.
discussion with the city council. Because they will take into consideration all these recommendations that have been made. This is either directly by public or by, qualified boards and commissions. That's important feedback that they want to hear. It'll also help when going back to the seller saying, hey, here's some good comments we heard, and this is what we want incorporated into this. So staff would recommend making a motion for certificate of design compliance covering all the recommendations that have been made in the meeting. It may, this is gonna not be super fun, but it may be good to go over them quickly. So that when you make a motion, you can just say, as was just discussed. So if you want, I can.
I'd be
read
happy
through all of
to
this.
summarize them if that would be helpful for the commission, but I'll do as direct.
You want me to summarize them? Or do you want to go?
Totally up to you. I mean, I've taken notes of those that were
She does.
from
So
everybody.
you do
Do
it.
you want me to try to do it?
Yeah, and start with the non-park related ones, because there were a couple of those.
Yeah. Hey, let's see how good I
Sorry.
got this.
I'm sorry.
The fun throwback. And when I used to do minutes. Oh. Okay, so a recommendation to add the minimum amount of fill for lots 105 through 109 that still achieves functionality across the project, but reduces any view blockage.
Yep.
In looking at the aesthetics of retaining walls, given that it's private visibility, it's not a main aesthetic concern, but some aesthetic attention needs to be paid to it. Interested in the idea of using the tiered sections of the retaining wall as planting areas.
And obviously meet engineering requirements.
Yes. Looking at access from the existing neighborhood to the park as well as the new lots to the park. Considering an extension of Street B physically moving westward so that there's access from the lots to the park.
And that's just pedestrian. access, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Pedestrian access through a walkway and then looking eastward, providing an easement that could accommodate pedestrian access while still allowing lot 109 to landscape appropriately in their front yard. Okay. Interested in considering specific building articulation that would reduce the proximity of the homes across lots 110 to 111 and 111 to 112 to avoid unnecessary closeness. Then from Niels, we had a concern with animating small parks so that they're actually used as valuable spaces for the community. So looking specifically at closing the loop of the walking path so that that can be a continuous route for joggers. Okay, then talking about the playground, look at different types of playground equipment within what could be fit physically there as well as budget, and considering amenities that are not offered at other parks, with a special focus on amenities for young children like potlucks or swings. Looking at bifurcation throughout the neighborhood, reduce physical and visual bifurcation by considering the elimination of parking stalls altogether, or if parking is required, reducing the amount on Dover Hill. Alongside with that comment, improving the.
I would say if parking is required, I would rather see parking down by the pavilion than on Dover Hill.
Okay, I do have that written down, but that's a good thing to verbally reiterate. On that same comment, I had improving the visibility of the sidewalk from Dover Hill into the walking loop.
Not only visibility, but physical connection, more direct physical connection to the path.
Okay, perfect. Then looking at minimizing the slopes that would make the retention basin feel really deep and unnatural. So looking at a shallower slope and a more contoured shape that allows the basin to feel more natural. Also providing a greater buffer between the pavilion and the retention pond. And looking at looping the walking path around the pavilion.
And the slope to be sodded.
Yes, that comes later, but we can mention that
Okay.
on that one too, looking at using sod within that basin
Yeah.
to allow for active use. Okay, we got that one. There's a few of these that we covered already, so I'm gonna just kind of scroll through them. Looking at shade and also seating around the playground for more seasonal use.
And to clarify, that shade is like shade around the playground for sitting under, not shade structure over the play structure.
Okay,
Would that be landscaping shade, tree planting?
I think absolutely.
Okay.
And I've actually incorporated trees into playgrounds as long as they're outside of the fall zones to create that shade.
Sarah,
So-
do you feel like that addresses the concern of it not being too exposed to sunlight? Just want to make sure you're comfortable with that. Looking at the feasibility of sinking the play structure into the grade, and I think that was something that the chair was going to coordinate the articulation with Ivory on, since there was some confusion about how that would be done. Looking at keeping outdoor lighting available in the pavilion if feasible, and alongside that note, looking at articulating the required street lighting to benefit the safety and security of the park. Moving on to retention, maximizing the retention that's done on private lots to limit the amount needed in the park. And finally, I have looking at incorporating 1 to 2 pet stations around the loop. That was everything on my list.
Very well done,
Am
thank you.
I a commissioner now?
That's very good. I think that was helpful to go through that.
And on the landscaping, just to emphasize, I think it's in there, but low water use landscaping and pollinator.
Yes,
Landscaping. The other thing that I think is important that we didn't talk about, but use turf where turf is used,
yeah,
as opposed to the little strips of turf around the outside that aren't.
that is actually codified now in our city ordinance that the use of sod has to be for activity zones, not for remnant strips, so. I think given the reading of those points into the record, if the ARC wants to move with the motion, that could be in reference to the points that we've entered, so you don't have to reread all of those.
Great. So any other comments or thoughts from the commission?
Steve's still with us.
Yeah.
We haven't been able to hear him. His audio hasn't, he can hear us, but we haven't been able to hear him. so.
I saw him shake his
I
head,
saw
so,
him do a thumbs
All
up.
right,
yeah.
Steve.
we do need, so it's a 5-member commission, so we need at least 3 votes for any motion to carry.
So
Steve can vote by raising his hand.
we need a motion.
And the motion is to issue
Since you are the user of this.
it's a motion to issue a certificate of design compliance. So that's what you'd be
With the stipulations that we
That were
just
just read.
We're read into the
So
record.
motion to approve project SUB 22005 with the conditions noted earlier.
Great, so we have a motion. Any other comments? Do we have a second?
Our second.
So we have a motion, a second, all in favor? Aye,
I,
Steve raised his hand for the record.
and that is unanimous. So with that, we have a unanimous vote on that.
Fantastic.
Right.
I think that was a really productive conversation and will help make the space really great.
Yeah.
Community.
So with that, thank you very much. We will move on to item number 3.0, which is the consent agenda, which deals with approval of the minutes. We need a motion to approve the minutes per the paragraph on the agenda.
Yeah, and just to recap for that, what will happen is, once the minutes are prepared, we'll send them out to the commission. If you have any changes, we will edit those and then resend them out to you. But if there are no changes, the minutes would stand as approved. So you're kind of pre-approving them pending any changes that need to be made. Just the process we follow.
yeah,
So would one of you make a
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
as described on the agenda?
The minutes of the January 26th. As described in the instructions.
Great, we have a motion. Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
Steve raised his
Yeah.
hand.
Okay, correct, but that is unanimous, so thank you. Any other discussion? So with that, I need a motion to adjourn this meeting for our next meeting on February 23rd.
Well,
So moved.
I moved.
Second, yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Steve,
Steve raises his hand, so it's unanimous.
It's already on.
thank you. Steve.
All right, thank you
Thank you,
very
everybody.
much.
Appreciate
Let you
it.
guys know if we're gonna have a meeting on the 23rd. I know most months we don't have projects, but as we see the spring kicking up, we got more projects coming through. So I will send you an email whether we're canceling or doing that, but if you tentatively have the time on the calendars.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Thank you very much.
Should I just delete these notes now or?
Yeah, just delete it.
We'll work through it again.
No, I'm just send this to Mike immediately, so they're out.